it had built up itself. And if you look through the budget booklet, and it gives examples of all Joe and Mary and Michael and Teresa and how they're affected by the budget. Well, there's one very obvious thing omitted, Minister, and that is the fact that when the Christmas tree is still standing in the corner of the sitting room, the first bill for water charges will arrive in the door. Now, you will say it's not an issue for the budget. It's not a budgetary matter. But, Minister, the reality for people watching at home is that it is a budgetary issue for them. When they're trying to balance the books in terms of their household budget, it is an issue that they have to take account of. Because, Minister, it was you who set up Irish Water. It was you who gave the approval to spend €180 million in setting up the organisation, and another €500 million on installing meters before a pipe is even fixed around the country. You gave the CER the instructions in relation to water charges, and the tables that you have published in the back of the budget book are absolutely meaningless. Meaningless. They might be meaningful to you and the officials who drew them up, but, Minister, these bills will be arriving in the door in January, and as I have outlined, for many people, especially individuals on low income, who will benefit to the tune of €174, and even net of the tax relief that you're proposing to give them on the water charges, they'll be paying probably €200 to €300 at least. So they'll be out of pocket. They're worse off as a result of the budget, which we were told was designed to help them. How did you manage to achieve that? Spending €1 billion that you didn't have, which you borrowed, and the very people that you're trying to help are worse off. A couple with one spouse working, earning €40,000, is worse off as a result of your budget. I mean, that is an extraordinary achievement, Minister. Yeah, others are better off, and the analysis will come out in the fullness of time. But for a government who stated its objective was to lift the burden on people who were feeling it the most, then you have singularly failed, and once again you have failed the test of fairness. And doesn't it say something about a government that when you're taking money off people, you have no accountability to pay then? When you're taking money out of people's pay packet, as you did when you abolished the PRSI exemption, you took €264 off everyone, whether they were earning $20,000 a year or $200,000 a year. But oh no, when it's time to give something back, you don't do it that way. You don't give everyone the same. You don't look after the person working on the minimum wage or the family struggling on €35,000 or €40,000 a year, who are above all of the social welfare eligibility thresholds. Supplementary welfare, family income supplement, rent supplement, medical card, they get none of that. And they're worse off as a result of this budget, Minister. There is no doubt, Minister, and we all accept, that the marginal rate of tax in this country is high. And you would have been much better off in this budget, increasing tax credits, for example, which would have benefited everybody equally. Instead, you've gone with a mishmash approach. You say you're reducing the marginal rate of tax, and you are up to the level of €70,000. We're told that it was a big issue for inward investment, that when Minister Bruton is going abroad to New York trying to attract in the big executives, that they're very worried about the marginal rate of tax. Well, I don't think they're earning less than €70,000, Minister. It was all about getting the headline. It was all about fulfilling the commitment to reduce the marginal rate of tax, rather than using the tax system to really redistribute resources and introduce equity to the system. Which brings me, Count Corlett, to the issue of budgetary reform. Because when Fine Gael and Labour were in opposition, they were going to do the divil and all in terms of budgetary reform. We were going to have open debates in this House and that committee about what the real options were. We were going to have a much more mature way about deciding on the budget of the country. The days of the big bang announcements on budget day were to be gone. Well, the truth is also different. The process of introducing the budget is more secretive now than at any time in the history of the state, with fewer people involved in actually making decisions than ever happened. We're told, Minister Noonan, that you brought the tax package to the Cabinet this morning on the day of the budget. A fundamental pillar of the budget was rubber stamped with no scope for changes by your Cabinet on the very day of the budget. Well, I can tell you, if I were your Cabinet colleague, I wouldn't be putting up with that, Minister. I certainly wouldn't put up with that. Never has so much power been concentrated in the hands of so few. It makes a mockery of the constitutional principle of collective cabinet responsibility. This is not a mature way of framing the budget, where even those who are meant to be making the decision are kept in the dark right up until the last minute. Now, Minister, I've already said that the recovery is real, and we warmly welcome it, but you have had a little bit of luck along the way, which you failed to mention in your speech, and that is, of course, the European statistical standards, which I think it's worth explaining to people the difference that it has made. It has increased the level of Irish GDP by over €10 billion. Overnight, in July, the announcement came, the economy had grown by 6.5% overnight, not over a year, overnight, with the inclusion of illicit activities and a number of other issues. Now, that didn't affect growth rates because the previous year's GDP was changed as well, and I acknowledge that. But where it did matter, of course, was in respect of the percentage deficit, because while the cash deficit remained unchanged, it is now being expressed as a percentage of a much higher GDP figure. The result, of course, was that the deficit at the end of last year was recalculated down from 7.2% to 5.7%. bringing us an awful lot closer to the 3% limit than we would otherwise have been. Now, you got lucky on the technical reclassification, which could just as easily have gone the other way. But given that it did bounce in our favour on this occasion, it made a difference of €2.7 billion in respect of tax increases and spending cuts, which you did not have to bring in because of that. And that is very positive, but we got lucky on that one, Minister, even if you won't admit it. Minister, on the issue of corporation tax, I really hope, Minister, that the Irish football team in Gelsenkirchen tonight show a lot more resistance to German pressure than you did in relation to corporation tax. Because that's what has happened here, Minister. We all know you were under intense pressure from your colleagues in Germany, in the European Commission, the OECD, and I'm sure it was very uncomfortable going to ECOFIN and Eurogroup meetings over the last number of months. But you have decided to preempt the process here, Minister. You have made a number of positive changes in respect of intellectual property regime and others, which I welcome. But anything that introduces uncertainty in relation to Ireland's corporation tax regime is risky. And that's what you have done, Minister, because in relation to our, well, I know it's a touchy subject for you because I know you're very nervous about this announcement, but in respect of our offering for those who are looking to invest in Ireland, corporation tax is a vital tool. Now, you have stood over the 12.5% rate, and our party has long signed up to that, as you know, and we welcome it. But this is not some theoretical debate about tax planning or about the morality of multinational companies. It should come as no surprise to any of us. Multinational companies will employ the best tax practitioners in the world in an effort to minimise their global corporation tax liability. We all know that. You came into this House 2 years ago and you said that the double Irish had nothing to do with Irish law. Then it must be something to do with other jurisdictions and US law. I have to quote, Minister, and I won't waste my limited time in reading it out to you. You did. Now, you have made a change here which does affect the offering that Ireland is making in respect of corporation tax. And I worry about that, Minister, because it does introduce uncertainty. Because let there be no mistake about it, this is a debate about jobs and about investment. And other countries will not be satisfied with the change you've made. You've preempted the BEPS process, which has not been concluded. We've had an interim report, we've had no final report, we've had the Dutch, who are also under the spotlight from the EU, coming out saying they'll be making no changes until the process is complete. I am all for improving the global corporation tax regime, making it more transparent and reconstructing it in a way that multinational companies do pay more tax, but in a way where every country moves in tandem, step by step. That is not happening. You're talking about a new intellectual property regime, which will have to go to the European Commission. You sent a much more modest proposal to the European Commission 2 years ago on the Living Cities initiative, and you're still waiting for a decision from them in respect of that. So that really won't give any comfort to multinationals who are looking at investing in Ireland, because in my view, Minister, what you have done is a mistake, and that certainty which we have built around our corporation tax offering is beginning to crumble. and multinationals who are looking at where to invest. They look at the UK stepping up its game, introducing a patent box irrespective of what Europe says. They look at them bringing down their headline rate. They look at them streamlining the way that foreign profits are being taxed. And they look at Ireland shivering under pressure from Europe and others and making a change before there is any international consensus as to where this direction is going. And that, for me, is a mistake. We should do it in step with other countries, but you have chosen otherwise. Minister, the improvement in the employment situation is very welcome. And I agree with you that those who suffered the most, you've said this many times in the economic collapse, were those who lost their job. And we all want to see further jobs created in the economy. Progress has been made, but the real issue now in terms of jobs, Minister, is to tackle the stubbornly high number of people who are long-term unemployed. That is the real bottleneck in the jobs system as I can see it at this point in time. The 180,000 people who are on the live register for a year or more. And your government pays a lot of lip service to the issue of supporting SMEs and small business, but really you've done precious little to help them in practical terms. And if you travel outside Dublin, Minister, towns and villages are dying on their feet right around this country, and that's because small businesses can't survive. The SMEs that you say are the lifeblood of the Irish economy cannot survive. They are under immense pressure. Small businesses are closing. Young people are leaving rural areas and job opportunities are few and far between. We're developing a very lopsided country with population and employment being pulled into the Dublin area with each passing day. Now that's not good for people living in Dublin, Minister, because it creates pressures in relation to property prices, the cost of renting properties and indeed other issues, and it is simply killing rural Ireland. The imbalance between the greater Dublin area and the rest of the country needs to be talked about, and more importantly it needs to be acted on. And Taoiseach, that is the kind of issue which I am highlighting in relation to vision that you should be articulating but which we're not hearing anything about. Supporting small business has always been a core value of our party, and that's why we have proposed a number of innovative measures which would make a real difference, including a special 15% CGT rate for entrepreneurs, enhancing the employment and investment scheme to make it more attractive, allowing the new strategic banking corporation lend directly to SMEs, reforming the local authority rate system and linking it to the current performance of business, allowing the self-employed a voluntary opt-in scheme to give them greater PRSI benefits, tackling the excessive bureaucracy and red tape that businesses have to deal with, make the procurement system more user-friendly and accessible to SMEs, and reforming the tax system to make self-employment more attractive, especially for those at lower levels of income. And Minister, you seem to believe that the banking system in Ireland has been repaired. Well, I beg to differ, and I use a very simple measure. A young couple going into a bank today seeking to take out a mortgage for the first time to buy their very first home will invariably be paying 4.25% to 4.5% interest rate. A similar couple in the Eurozone will typically be paying about 2.5% for that mortgage. The same story applies to SMEs. They are paying way over the odds in respect of the cost of borrowing in this country than they are in other countries. The ECB has been reducing interest rates. The Irish economy has not benefited to the extent that it should from those rate cuts, Minister, because the banks have not been passing them on to people who are on variable products, whether it be SMEs or personal borrowers or mortgage holders. That is an issue that needs to be dealt with. Similarly, Minister, the issue of mortgages, which I'd love to go into and I haven't time to go into because I lost time having been heckled last Count Corla, but I won't eat into my colleague's time, Deputy Sean Fleming. I welcome, Minister, that you are finally abolishing the pension levy at the end of next year, having already broken your promise. It was to be gone at the end of this year. I said back in 2011 when you introduced it, I didn't think it would end in 2014. Instead of ending it, you increased it to 0.75%, and now you're retaining it next year at 0.15%. And when all of the deferred members of the Irish Aviation Superannuation Pension Scheme are contacting the members of the House, people who are facing a 60% cut in their benefits, and when they asked what this government's policy response was, this government's policy response was to put its hand into that pension fund and take more money out of it. You've taken 2.2 billion euro out of the private pension savings of our citizens. That was a scandal, Minister. It was legal theft. It should never have happened, and I'm glad you're finally coming to your senses and you're going to end it.
Thank you.
This is a budget motivated by electoral strategy. It is a budget introduced by a government hoping that people will forget the way it targeted low and middle income families and how the most vulnerable bore the brunt of the budget adjustment in recent years. It is a budget from a government that spoke of a democratic revolution and promised ambitious political reform, but which has instead been the least accountable government in the history of the state. It comes from a government that is clearly motivated by the short term, even if it risks the sustainable recovery of our economy. The words of Talleyrand, speaking about the restored Bourbon dynasty after the abdication of Napoleon, spring to mind. They had learned nothing and forgotten nothing. Now we hand it over to the people to pass their judgment.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you.
I now call Deputy Sean Fleming. Deputies have.
And I want to thank my colleague, Deputy Michael McGrath, for opening up the Fianna Fáil to this budget here today. The budget today is all about making choices. Over the last 3 years, we have seen 3 regressive budgets which cut expenditure from essential public services and income of those who could least afford it. We on this side of the House welcome the improvement in the economy and in the government's finances. However, these improvements are not being shared equally in society. Many people have seen no improvement in their situation and in fact are still coping with serious reductions in their incomes and public services that they rely on. On the other hand, some people are seeing a significant improvement in their financial situation. Today is an opportunity to bring a socially balanced budget. For the first time in a number of years, there are available resources. These resources should be allocated to those who need services the most. We need to reinvest in health, education, childcare, social housing and getting people back to work. This will help build a fairer and more caring society. We in Fianna Fáil have learned lessons in recent years, and I believe the public have too. There must be no return to action politics. But anyone looking in today can see this government has learned nothing from the past. And despite your agenda of political reform, you are doing and heading in the opposite direction. There has been an unexpected surge in economic growth in recent months. We must not all blow this immediately. We need to see this economic growth fully bedded in before we start offering tax cuts to the people on highest incomes in order to buy their votes for the next general election. Everybody will understandably welcome a cash improvement in today's budget. However, I would caution this is only half the picture. The government is giving with one hand and taking it back with the other. The new water tax, which came into effect on the 1st of October and for which the bills will arrive early in the new year, will cancel out any of the sweeteners announced by the government here today. Overall, when people weigh up the full picture, most people will be no better off next year. It is also worth remembering that Ireland will be running a deficit next year of in the order of almost €6 billion. The government is borrowing money to give it away here today. Surely we have all learned that money we borrow today has to be paid back with interest in the future, and this will leave less money for resources for essential services in the years to come. I look at your document produced here today, and your document tells us that the opening government debt, and it's on page C60 if anyone wants to look at the government figures, the opening government debt at the beginning of 2015 will be €203 billion. The opening government debt at the beginning of 2016 will be €210 billion. The opening government debt at the beginning of 2017 will be €212 billion. And the opening government debt at the beginning of 2018 will be €215 billion. So you are predicting over the next 4 years an increase in the government debt of €12 billion, but yet you're offering tax cuts today, even though we have to borrow to finance those. The actions today are creating a divided society. The gap between the haves and the have-not is widening. Fianna Fáil could have chosen in our budget proposal to cut the top rate of income tax for the highest income earners, but we chose not to do so. We believe resources in the first instance should be directed to improve services for our citizens and to improve the quality of life for all. There are many people waiting for services for unacceptable waiting periods. People cannot get hospital appointments, and the government's response is to give a tax cut to the high earners. Children are in overcrowded classrooms, but the government's response is to give tax cuts to high earners. Critically ill people are waiting for medical cards, but the government's response is to give tax cuts to high earners. We need a programme for suicide prevention, but the government's response is to give tax cuts to the high earners. People are homeless and sleeping in doorways, not 100 yards from this building, but the government's response is to give tax cuts to the high earners. People cannot afford the new water tax, but the government's response is to give tax cuts to high earners. I know the government feels we should all be aboard the train leaving the station, but in your haste, you're leaving many people stranded on the platform. I would ask you to think about the effects you're having on society. A key aspect of budget proposals in relation to the health budget was to rebuild our health services. It is not sufficient just to want to stand still in the delivery of our health services. Nurses, doctors and other frontline staff are under enormous pressure. However, the Department of Health is now projecting a deficit in the HSE of this year of €500 million, and they will again need a supplementary estimate in a month or two's time. There is no surprise that the 2014 health budget was completely bogus, with the agencies in charge of delivering it looking for post-budget verification of the figures after it was announced in the Dáil. So in view of the recent experience, we have to be sceptical when presented with another health budget here today. Personality might have changed in the department, but very little has changed. And we want proof that the health budget will be able to meet the HSE service plan. I have looked at this document, Minister, since we came in here an hour ago. And I look at your expenditure plans. And for anybody listening, the hole in this budget today is in the health estimate. The health estimate for last year was 12.7 billion. The health estimate for 2015 is 13.079. The health estimate for 2016 is 13.253 billion, and the health estimate for 2017 is 13.29 billion. That is a 1.6% increase over 3 years. 0.5% per annum. How anybody thinks you can correct the health services in Ireland with an increase of 0.5% per annum is bad enough you did it this year. It's bad enough that you're doing it next year, but you're now telling the people you're going to do it again in 2016 if you're re-elected, and you're determined to do the same again in 2017. The hole in these figures today is in the health estimate.
Sacrificed again.
I refer you to page 80. I want people to understand where the hole is. I refer you to page 80 of your document that you have published here today. And this is written in note 2. It's very, very small microscopic print. You'd want to go to almost Specsavers to be able to read it, in fact. The addition to the figures provided to the Department of Health in progressing a range of saving measures includes saving measures of 130 million and income generation measures 330 million, estimated to have the potential to support expenditure in 2015. Further details will be provided in the revised estimates volume sometime in the new year. So there's 460 million of a black hole that you will not tell us today how it's being fixed. You are telling us you're going to increase income generation capacity at the HSE for 330 million and another expenditure cut of 130 million. You came in here last year with your expenditure cut of 113 million for your bogus medical card probity, and we saw where that got you. Shambles. And have you learned nothing? 460 million of a black hole, and I want to come especially to where these unspecified savings are, and I can tell you where you talk about them. I go up to page 77 in your booklet here again, and you say, when you're talking about expenditure, to do so will involve a commitment to ongoing reform and efficiency measures and reprioritisation of expenditure as appropriate. That means cancel and cut projects. That's what that. And why won't you tell us here today what's in this estimate? And why have we to wait a couple of months to find these figures coming out? And now, Minister, what I really have to ask you is, these are your figures of income generation measures, 330 million. Is that 330 million made up of additional A&E charges? I'm speaking, Minister. Is it new A&E charges? Is it new prescription charges, which we'll see in the HSE service back? Is it a charge for waiting on a trolley in an A&E unit? That's what it's going to be. When you come into a hospital, you will be asked for your private health insurance number, and they'll say to you, you can have the trolley or the chair, but you're paying €400 a day because you have private health insurance. Where else are you getting the 360 million extra euro? I know where some of it is coming from. You had promised free GP care for the under sixes last year. It did not happen. And still you have to get a supplementary estimate to balance your books. But we saw the hint of it the other day. The new minister has said there might be a nominal fee for the free GP card. So how much will this nominal fee be for the under sixes GP card? He said those words. They're not my words, they're your minister's words. So, Minister, when you come in here with a budget and you talk about increasing expenditure for health, when you're talking about a 0.5% increase per annum for the next 3 years, and even in that, you're allowing for 460 million per annum to be achieved by income generation, and you won't tell us what you're talking about. We had a black hole here last year, the day of the budget in health, and the HSE blew it out of the water within 24 hours. We've seen the freedom of information. I probably know what has happened. You made sure there's nothing on a file to be FOI'd for the coming year, but we do know. And these are your figures that I've read out to you. There's a black hole of 460 million in the estimate alone, which you said they will be provided when the revised estimate. Today is the day we need to know what's happening for next year, not in a couple of months' time. And there's a black hole in the health estimate, and you failed to grapple with it. You didn't grapple with the last minister, and this minister has got the bestie as well. And we'll be back here again next year with another supplementary estimate for health again, like we've done on every single budget you have brought in. You have never brought in a health estimate since you became Minister for Public Expenditure that stood the test of 12 months. Always within next June and July we'll know about the overrun. Minister, why do you year in, year out bring in a health estimate that you cannot stand over? You've never presented a true or a fair or an accurate health estimate, and this year is no different. And I'm just giving you the tip of the iceberg of the figures we've been able to glean here in an hour's notice, and you're not providing us even with the further information. And the information will come out, and that income of the 460 million black hole will have to be found. And of course you're going to magic it away. You'll magic it away from growth. There 460, and I refer you back to say, page 8. Minister, I want to leave the party politics, because things are too serious in the health. Minister, I believe that the essential health services need to be looked after, but nowhere this is more truer than in the crucial issue of suicide. Suicide remains the nation's silent killer. There's not a community, not to mind a family, that hasn't been affected in it. And there's nothing in this to help suicide victims. Nothing whatever. And it is particularly hard on young men. Some of the suicide, Minister, there are 10 suicides a week on your watch, and you're doing nothing about it. And the situation is getting worse. And most of those people are young males in the 15 to 19 age group packet. And some measures by this government have specifically contributed to both the suicide and the homelessness situation. On the suicide, young people leaving school, and especially young males, not knowing their worth and place in society, you took away the guidance counsellors from them in the school, and they left not prepared for the outside world. Then when they left, you cut, in your term here, you cut their job seekers allowance when they were 18 or 19 from €188 to €100 a week. Then your local authorities refused to let them on the housing list because they told them there's room in their parents' attic or they could find room in their parents' house. And then when they had to leave the parents' house, you wouldn't give them rent supplement because you wouldn't put them on the housing. And no wonder they're homeless, and no wonder there are addiction issues, and there's nothing in this dealing with the suicide issue. As I said, we've also seen that the services and the people dealing with suicide are totally stretched, and in fact 40% of people who've committed suicide have been in touch with the overstretched National Suicide Office seeking help, but the help wasn't being able to solve the problem, and we all know how difficult it is. But, Minister, tax cuts for the rich is your answer to the suicide problem, and I say shame on this government the way you're doing it. I'd also say, when it comes to speech and language therapists for the young children in the school who need it at their formative years, again you've cut back on that. Also the elderly people who many of whom have had a stroke, you've cut back on the speech and language therapies because they need occupational therapists as well to get them back up on their feet. I mentioned the medical card fiasco, last year's figure, trundling on. Today, I've had a constituent on to me saying you have an appeal with your office in Ballyshannon and the appeal is in there 10 months. 10 months, and they had a discretionary medical card. They're appealing it, and the appeal is going on 10 months. Probably took 2 or 3 months to deal with the original application, and now the 10. We were used to these extended delays when it came to some social welfare payments, but it's now a new procedure to have it in the appeals office for the Department of the HSE dealing with medical cards. Minister, or Taoiseach, as you're the only one there from the government at this stage, I want to move on to the issue of housing and the increase in social housing over the last 6 years. There's now 90,000 families on the housing list. The proposed central bank change. You're wasting my time. You're wasting my time.
No, you'll get it.
Taoiseach, you might be good enough to tell us where the 2 ministers who came in here are. I suspect they're gone off to talk to the media to give them a full briefing that they withheld from their office. I'd love to know where they are. There will be details on the 6 o'clock news from their press conference. Where are they?
They're broadcasting to the nation at the moment.
Yeah.
Deputy Fleming has the floor.
Count Corla, last Count Corla, I'm asking you, last Count Corla, I'm just on a point of order, last Count Corla, I'm asking you,
Sorry, please.
Count Corla, I'm asking you, last Count Corla, for next year, in advance of the budget, we want the commitment that the 2 respective ministers will sit here to at least have the courtesy to hear what the opposition have to say. And if that can't be delivered, there should be a question about them being asked to deliver. Let him deliver his script on the national media or whatever TV channel he's on. This is the place to deliver it, and this is the place to listen to the response. And it's broadcast here, it's on 2 channels, as we know, it's on RT. But it's a disregard to the entire democratic process in relation to this budget as the biggest statement of the year, and ministers feel they can at least walk away and not listen to what's going on.
Thank you, Deputy.
Back to the housing situation. The proposed central bank changes to mortgage requirements will compound the problems in relation to young people getting their houses. Home ownership will be concentrated into fewer and fewer hands, and the majority of people will have to pay increased rent while this is going on. And there is a full section, and it's the only section in the Minister's speech I actually want to refer to here today, when he talks about, I'm today announcing $2.2 billion for social housing provision in the next 3 years. He's going to give some of it between now and 2017. Then he's going to give $300 million to a public-private partnership yet to be established and dreamt up. Why not do the direct route and do it through the capital expenditure programme? And then he's looking to do some of it off-balance sheet finance vehicle will provide at least $400 million from 2015 onwards to approved housing agents. Minister, I would say, Taoiseach, the government is more interested in off-balance financing mechanisms to deal with critical social problems than dealing with the social problems themselves. If you were determined to deal with the housing issue, you wouldn't have to be running around the house for an off-balance sheet mechanism. public-private partnership. Since the foundation of the state, the country has been able to build social houses. And now are we outsourcing it to off-balance sheet situations like Irish Water and semi-state companies and special purpose vehicles, as you call it in your speech, and public-private partnership. The housing shouldn't be, the housing programme should not be outsourced to the profiteering end of finance. And the reason I have difficulty, and I don't believe any of those figures, the reason I don't believe any of those figures is NAMA were told to provide houses for local authorities, and they offered, I think, 4,000 houses, 2,000 of which were rejected by local authority. I bet NAMA will be able to sell them very comfortably in the private, through private sales, but again there'll be no protection for the taxpayer, whereas local authorities didn't take them up. And out of that 2,000 that have been accepted, I understand only 700 have been taken up. So I don't believe the commitment of this government to social housing, because we wouldn't have the level of homelessness if you were actually serious about it. Now, I do say, and I'm sorry the Minister is not here, because I could say a lot on homelessness, but instead I will give way to Father Peter McVerry, who spoke at a conference last Friday, to which the Minister for Public Expenditure himself attended. And Father Peter McVerry captured it very well at the conference last Friday when he said, "I am absolutely dismayed at the idea that the tax cuts are going to be at the top rate of tax, because basically it's not helping people at the lower end of the wage scale. The problem of people sleeping on the street could be solved by Christmas." That's coming from a man that we all know and respect, and is capable of dealing with the issue. And if he is saying that, what is the government's response? We'll have public-private partnerships in 2017. We'll have an off-balance sheet financial vehicle in 2017. We'll have a special purpose vehicle in 2017. If you give Father Peter McVerry and the other organisations the money, and you stepped aside and got out of the way with your special funding measures in 2017, it solved the problem for you in a few months. It solved the problem. It brings me on now to the issue of water charge. How much time have I left?
9 minutes remaining.
9 minutes. I want to talk about water charges. And look, at the government, we know you're trying to wash your hands of the debacle you made of this, but your hands are dirty, and no amount of washing and handling will get you out of this hole at this stage. And you know households will have bills where their 2 adult children are €482 per annum. And all of the funds in the first 2 years are going to fund the 500 plus staff super quango, and that is consuming 180 million set-up costs, together with the cost of installing the meters. So all the revenue from the first 2 years of the domestic water customers is going solely on the set-up costs of the super quango, and you have proposed to abolish quangos in your last election manifesto. Not only did you not honour that, but you did it with knobs on it. You made the biggest quango in living memory in this country by setting up Irish Water. And your measures here today are, they're a hit and a miss. There's measures there to help people on social welfare payments and people who are in receipt of the household benefits package and the fuel allowance, and there's also a measure for tax credits. Now, I have to say about what's on offer for the tax credits, I've looked at the figure. There's not a bob in the kitty next year for anyone getting a tax credit, because you have to claim it a year in arrears. So probably about 2017 or 18, some people might be lucky to get something back from that. However, there's one group that you missed, and again I'm quoting your figures here today. In the Minister of Finance's own booklet today, he says there are 880,700 people, income earners, exempt from income tax because they're below the threshold to pay income tax because they're covered by their tax credit. Those people will not get the benefit of what's on offer to people on social welfare, and they won't be in a tax situation to get a tax rebate in a year. So there's 870,000 families not going to be able to avail of this here today, because they're not on social welfare and they're not in the tax brand, and they are the low-paid, hard-pressed families that once again you've ignored. And the Minister, Taoiseach, who's gone out, tried to send her text saying she's interested in low-paid families. They are the low-paid family. They are the only group excluded. Think about it, Taoiseach. The only group excluded. Practically half the households in Ireland, there's about 1.6 million households in Ireland. You're giving something to a couple of 100,000 families on social protection, and you're giving a tax credit to people on the tax rate, but half the houses of Ireland are not in the income tax rate because they're on salaries of 20,000, 30,000 in that bracket, and the tax credits for the family results in them not being in the tax bracket. And there's nothing in there for the low-income families. Shame on you. And I don't think any bit of messing around is going to solve this problem. In relation to the overcrowded classrooms and the vote in the Department of Education, every one of us here have been in classrooms in recent months with 31, 32 and 33 children. And as a first step, we have proposed a reduction in the pupil-teacher ratio in primary schools from 28 to 27 commencing next year. And this would reduce class sizes. Everybody understands class sizes, but ye talk about meeting demographic demand, and all you're talking about is trying to stay still. And that means you are telling the children in classrooms where there's 32, 33 and 34, stay there until 2017, and we'll give the well-off parents in the community a tax cut. That's your answer to everything here today. I want to move on in relation to social inclusion. And also, Minister, you've done nothing on the small schools in rural areas in relation to the cuts you made to their class sizes in those areas. I do welcome the measures, Minister, about where people going back to work will be able to retain the child dependence allowance that they have on social welfare. That was an employment wedge, and I do welcome that. But then I look at other young people who want to get into the labour market and apprentices, and we have now a record low number of 7,000 apprentices in the country. There should have been 40,000 people in apprenticeship scheme. But last year, you introduced a measure whereby apprentices who are on about €200 a week have to pay €900 for their 10 weeks break to go to the Institute of Technology to do the education part of the course. You're taking back half the money you're giving them to pay back the third-level fees, and that's in line with your increase in third-level fees, which you're continuing to roll out, and you're making it very difficult for people on that situation. Two other topics I want to deal with: the sale of state assets and helping Irish businesses. The government has talked about a yield of approximately 2 or 3 billion from the sale of state assets over the last couple of years. Last Thursday in the Dáil, the ministers confirmed receipt of 150 million from Bord Gáis Energy, 197 million from ESB, and taken in conjunction with the 405 million mentioned here from the privatisation of the National Lottery licence, it means you've received 752 million from the sale of state assets during the course of the last 12 months. And the biggest portion of this, of course, was the sale of the National Lottery licence, which was to have been ring-fenced for the National Children's Hospital. But the Minister confirmed that much of the overall proceeds received from the sale of state assets here last Thursday morning have gone to a range of projects including resurfacing regional roads, footpaths, preparation of public-private partnership for roads and education projects, energy-efficient works in local authority housing, social housing and tourism-related work. This does beg the question: when work starts on the new Children's Hospital during the lifetime of the next government, where will the ring-fence funding be at that stage? And the Minister seems intent on using the proceeds of sale of state assets for various pet projects around the country. He also confirmed that the sale of Bord Gáis Ireland realised over €1 billion. But he's only taken in 150 million of it today, and the timing of the receipt of the other 900 million, he said, is to be decided by the government. Again, it begs the question: is there money being held out there somewhere to be brought into the government coffers for a series of further pet projects to buy votes in the run-up to the general election? I thought, naively and all as I am, that the era of auction politics is over. But clearly it now appears you are buying people's votes with the proceeds of the sale of their family silver, and that's central to government policy. Finally, Taoiseach, directly comment to yourself, Taoiseach. I raised this with you here 2 years ago. I asked you about the Construction Contractors Act. It was passed here in summer 2013, brought forward by Senator Fergal Quinn. The legislation was passed and signed into law on the 29th of July 2013 by the President. And I asked you exactly 2 years ago, when you were sitting there, when the other ministers had disappeared, I asked you to activate that legislation, and you said you would do so. 2 years on, you have not done so. So I'm asking you, I've given up on Minister Howlett and Harris and Hayes and all those people responsible, and I'm asking you once again, will you please resolve the internal wrangling that is going on over this issue and commence this legislation forthwith? Because we do want to help Irish businesses, and under EU procurement law, your government National Procurement Office has said they average amount of tenders won by companies within a state within the EU for government-funded tenders is 98.6%. Ireland, we're just over 95%. Have you got that? And within EU procurement guidelines, it is possible to dramatically improve the situation. We need to tender smart and we need to tender clever. Other countries can do so to make sure their companies get the contract, and we must learn from them. And listen to this, Taoiseach, this will surprise you, should embarrass you actually. Minister Howland said here last Thursday in question time, when I asked the reasons why so much procurement contracts are given outside the state of Ireland is because, and wait for it, this is what the Minister said last Thursday. His own words, and I'm quoting from the Dáil record, the vast majority of public procurement opportunities in Ireland are advertised in English, which makes it easier for our tender documents accessible to businesses across Europe for whom English is their preferred second language. So, Minister, clearly if the Germans, French, Italians and Spanish can find a way out of making sure every other country can easily read their tender documents, I'd ask you to take and to do it for the advantage of their own domestic businesses in their own country. And they're doing it within EU procurement rules. I'm asking Taoiseach to ensure that our Minister gets a little bit clever on this one. Do what the Germans do what the French do what the Italian, Spanish and every other country does for 98.6% of government contract, and don't be left around. Because you know we have a procurement budget each year of 12 billion. 9 billion of it is in current expenditure, 3 billion of it is capital expenditure, and for every 1% you can shove that up over 95%. It's an additional 120 million euro staying in the country and not going to foreign companies.
Thank you, Deputy.
And this must be tackled if we're serious about keeping jobs at home. I conclude with that. This is a budget for the rich, and the haves and the have-nots have been left out.
Last Concordia, just on the point of order on behalf of my party, I just want to make a very serious point. That I've been here a long time in Leinster House and in the Dáil, and I've never witnessed before the discourtesy that has been displayed by the government side to the opposition on budget day. There's not a single minister on the other side of the House, and there's not a single minister of state on budget day. It's an absolute disgrace. I have never seen it before. I've never seen it before, last Corla, and I think something should be done about it, and the government should at the very minimum have the respect to have a presence here when opposition of all parties are making commentary on the budget presentations by the ministers, both Minister of Public Expenditure and Minister of Finance. It just reveals an absolute contempt for parliamentary debate and for parliamentary democracy.
I have to call Deputy Pierce Doherty. Deputy Doherty, and you have 30 minutes. Deputy is 30 minutes, and I hope you have the same respect for Deputy Doherty, please. Thank you. Deputy, now.
I too also want to say to the Taoiseach that it is disrespectful, but it doesn't surprise me that neither minister are here to listen to the critique of opposition parties and independents to your budget. You take the same approach with this House and parliamentary debate as you do stuffing state boards with your own personnel to try and get them elected to the Shannon. But you should restore some credibility in terms of parliamentary democracy and hear what we said today. On Saturday, 100,000 people marched through the streets of Dublin. This was the largest demonstration against austerity since the crisis began. It was a march against unjust water taxes, a tax that was dreamt up by Fianna Fáil and eagerly implemented by Fine Gael and Labour. It was an expression of the anger that people feel against your government, Taoiseach, that has no sense of fairness. After 6 long years of spending cuts and tax hikes, of unemployment and immigration, of bank bailouts and of golden handshakes, people are saying enough is enough. While today's budget will be spun by the government as a technical end of austerity, it won't end austerity for many, many ordinary people. Because austerity just isn't simply about balancing the books. It means placing the burden on the fiscal adjustments on those least able to pay. It is a policy, Taoiseach, and you're not aware of austerity because you didn't have to feel it yourself, but it's a policy that makes ordinary, hard-working people pay for the bad decisions and reckless behaviour of the few. It is deeply unfair, and it doesn't work. After almost 4 years in government, Fine Gael and Labour can no longer blame Fianna Fáil for the state of our economy or our society. And let me just remind you, Taoiseach, today there are 28,000 less young people in employment than when you took office. In the first 6 months, could you please have some respect?
Yeah.
Please, you haven't stopped speaking, and I've been speaking for 3 minutes.
Sorry.
You've been nibbling away over there. Have some respect and some decency.
Yeah, we'll have order for the speaker.
Taoiseach, you mightn't like to hear this, but there has been 28,000 less young people employed in this state since your government took office. 5,500 net new jobs have been created at the start of this month, but it would take a long, long time to deal with the 374,800 people that are stuck on the dole. And Taoiseach, with respect,
sorry, please.
Can I ask you maybe, and maybe if you want to speak, can you answer a question? Is it any wonder that over 200 people, mainly young people, continue to emigrate every single day in search of work or a better future? Because Sean Jempok is a Taoiseach, tan na figuri mar haru that the hutch reina. Sean Iraq, the policy fin the gale agus party na Kipre. Agus Sean and Kushkro, Tate Mila Danya, a Murkul, Fris Regina Bonicia, agus Nikita Milcha Ele e Portakiarto, Naro able to Vanshin. But Taoiseach, you today, your government had an opportunity to say and to show that you have listened to the people. You could have introduced a budget that would have eased the burden on the vast majority of people, a budget that would stimulate domestic economy and start a renewal of our public services. Unfortunately, Minister and Taoiseach, what you have introduced is a budget driven by the same policies of your previous budgets. You're taking the same failed approach to the recovery as you did to the recession, because you are wedded to the politics of privilege. The anger on the streets of central Dublin on Saturday was matched by the results in Dublin South West and Roscommon South Leitrim by-elections. A clear majority of voters in both constituencies said no to Fianna Fáil, no to Fine Gael and no to Labour's austerity policies. Clearly, you have lost your mandate. You no longer have the support of the people. In the dying days, Taoiseach, of the last Fianna Fáil administration, Micheál Martin's party had clearly lost touch with the people. They had clearly lost touch with the public mood. They were no longer able to hear what the people were saying. But your government is worse, because you have heard the voice of the people, and yet you carry on regardless. So let me spell it out to you, Taoiseach, what the people are saying. You need to scrap water charges, and you need to scrap them now. Because this is a government that's not just out of touch, but is arrogantly ignoring the appeal of the vast majority of people for an ending of the burden of austerity on their families and their communities. And it may seem strange to government TDs that anger has spilled onto the streets and into the ballot boxes. How can it be, asked the puzzled backbenchers that turn up here? The Troika are gone, the economy is growing, people are back to work, the deficit is under control, the recovery has finally arrived. Are people that really ungrateful, the backbencher asks? Can they not see that things are getting better? But what the backbencher doesn't understand is, unfortunately for the vast majority of people, there simply is no recovery. O Hashi and Gairke am seo, agus trí chin in the budget is mí chathami a choru go leor Chiley agus ní smó eile chun bachtanis. Inis agus Fine Gael agus Páirtín Loch Debre a ghuairt, ní hinan post a bhí agad agus grima choneal faoin ghuial. 1 in 7 working people, Taoiseach, are living at the risk of poverty. 1 in 4 people in a jobless household. And there are families that you expect, these same families that you expect to pay water charges. The question I ask you to ask yourself, where is the recovery, Taoiseach, for the family out there that only has €8.75 at the end of the week after essential bills are paid, as we've seen in the recent MAB survey? Where is the recovery for the family that's sleeping in a hotel room or on their parents' couch because the rent supplement trap drove them out of their home? Where is the recovery for the family whose children will immigrate today, tomorrow and the day after? Where is the recovery for the 324 families whose loved ones lie on a hospital trolley today? Where is the recovery for the non-verbal child waiting for speech and language therapy tomorrow, today and all of next year? Minister, I, like everybody, desperately want to see recovery. But a recovery is more than GDP statistics, and that's what you're missing. It's more than marginal reductions in the live register or a deficit. If it's to mean anything at all, a real recovery must mean improving people's lives, that the financial and emotional burden of the recession is lifted, and that tomorrow is better than today. Of course, for some there is a recovery, but the vast majority of families are being left behind. Fine Gael and Labour's policy and its recovery is a recovery for the few and not the many. When the detail of what you've announced today sinks in, there's no doubt about it that hundreds of thousands of people across the state will be bitterly disappointed. 2015 for them will not be the end of austerity for hard-pressed struggling families who have to pay property taxes and new water charges. Today's budget does little or nothing for these families, and indeed some cases leaves them worse off. And we must never forget why all of this is the case. This year, servicing the state's debt burden will cost the taxpayer just under €8 billion. And the question I pose is how much of this is a cost of the failure of this government to deliver on the promise of the banking debt? What is the cost of your government's failure to securing banking debt and sovereign debt, as was promised in June 2012 at the European Council meeting? Taoiseach, the biggest single challenge facing the economy is the lack of private and public sector investment. That is why so many people continue to be unemployed or underemployed. That is why so many people continue to emigrate. And Taoiseach, remember 2011, your famous 5-point plan? You promised to invest €5 billion over the lifetime of the government to get people back to work. The Labour Party promised a billion from the Strategic Investment Fund. But budget after budget, you have failed to live up to these promises. And that is why the rate of job creation is so painfully slow, because you are failing to invest in the economy. And Sinn Féin has consistently and continually argued for real state-led stimulus. Time after time, we have produced costed job creation proposals. First, you dismissed our plans. Now you have embraced some of them, but without the ambition and without the speed that the employment crisis demands. One of the most important choices that your government faced in advance of today's budget was whether to tax the wealthy or lift the burden from low and middle income earners. You are presenting your changes on the marginal rate of tax, the threshold at which people enter the marginal rate, and the changes to the USC as helping struggling families. The truth is rather different. Taken together, these combined changes, when taken alongside the impact of the property tax and water charges, will see those earning the average industrial wage in a worse-off situation. They will be neutral for middle-income families, but once again, the higher income earners will benefit significantly. Taoiseach, a low-paid worker on €30,000 will gain €174, less than the lowest possible water charge bill of €176. A middle-income earner on €50,000 will gain €546, all of which will be wiped out by water charges and the full cost of property tax, while a high-income earner on €70,000 will gain €746, the only category of worker in those at higher levels that will gain any real benefit from your tax changes. So where is the help for the low and middle-income families in these changes, Taoiseach? And I just wonder, when you were sitting around the cabinet table earlier this morning, did you not blush when the Minister of Finance told you that you would be €657 better off, Taoiseach? Now, you earn €183,000 per year, and he was telling you that he's going to give you a tax cut of $657. Did you not blush when he actually informed you that somebody, a married couple working on €35,000, would get a quarter of the tax cut that you were going to get? This is the type of fairness that we've seen from this government for the last 4 years. Agus níl intas go jockey party ar no Fine Gael ar Kenny Cosla Shaw, a shifsha and party privilege Shasta. And they were intas at a go Lord Dini, nar go hog Takier, who were and realtas Takier party and locked up at Vanya Shaw. Eis bommetje, ní cruher, ein postne, la loeduhan, ein Fine Gael, ar na reta emlaha penne. Ní hodja haisha, la tromla na dini at a fwy penance morial in the policy genia at a tokish dahagan realta shaw. Taoiseach, at a time when children are being forced to sleep in cars, in tents, in hotel beds, on family floors because of the lack of investment in social housing, It is criminal for government to cut the top rate of tax. And Peter McVerry was right. He was right when he expressed outrage at the proposal, saying that he was dismayed and outraged. That is what Fine Gael and Labour are doing here today. Sinn Féin welcomed the closure of loopholes that allow multinational companies to reduce their tax liability. When we called for an ending of the double Irish, the Minister for Finance said that the only problem was the loophole is that had the word Irish in it. He said that it was an American construction. He said there was nothing in the tax code that had allowed the Irish state to close it down. He said that in response to me. He misled the Dáil. No ifs, no buts about it, because today he has said he is closing down the double Irish, and we welcome that belatedly. Minister, the real tragedy in today's budget is the failure to abolish property tax and water charges. Fine Gael and Labour continue to overtax ordinary families. A fairer budget would shift the burden onto revenue sources less harmful to the domestic economy, while ensuring finance for investment in frontline services.